All right, Matthew, welcome to episode 53 of the Performance Advantage podcast with myself, Dr. Will O'Connor, and Dr. Matt Miller, sports scientists. On the Performance Advantage podcast, we bring sports science to the people. And this week, we're talking training zones, 1 through 50. No, we're not going up to 50, but
we have 100.
Depends who you're reading. What are training zones? What do they mean? How do they work? We're going into the science behind them. First up, me and Matt have a bit of a catch up, what we've been up to during lockdown. And as always, shout out to our sponsors, EnduranceTrainingHub.com and SmartMTBTraining.com. Online self-coaching software to help you become a better athlete. And currently during lockdown, EnduranceTrainingHub.com has webinars with myself and some special guests live Friday nights with replays uploaded within the platform, so check that out. Alright, let's get on with the show. Matt, I've been Zwifting.
Wow, how is it?
I love it. I actually, I've done it before. I did it a while back when I first got the Wahoo kickers for my research, and I was like, oh yeah, this is alright, but there wasn't the user level of it on, the users. They just weren't there. So you'd get on, there'd be a couple other people around. This is when it sort of first came out and smart trainers were just, starting to become popular or enter the market. I was like, oh yeah, this is alright, but it's kind of, I'm just this dude biking around some virtual world by myself. Meh, I'll just go out on the road, there's nothing much to do about it. And obviously, everyone's locked down, everyone's riding Zwift. I was getting FOMO. And then my wife started getting more into it. She started racing. And I was like, oh, she started getting likes and followers. And I was like, man, this sounds like a bit of me. So I got on, I did a couple races, I did B grade, I got my ass kicked. I am nowhere near the level I used to be when I was doing a lot of riding. And then I went C grade and I came second. So I was pretty proud of myself for that. Definitely probably poaching in C grade though. But having a bunch of fun. And now I just did a ride this morning. I'm trying to get leveled up. Because you get new kit when you get level. Matt, I'm sold. Love it.
That's pretty cool. I'm actually, yeah, I would like to try it, but I'm a bit worried. What I do is I just start going hard all the time.
I did it my biggest week of training, probably excluding, the Tarawera 100K this year. And then on Monday I had an easy ride. And Emma was like, don't just ride around Zwift, enter a race. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Reamed myself on an easy ride. And then I had an aerobic ride on Sunday. And again, I did the C grade race, which I was like, oh yeah, this will be way easier. Got super competitive, attacked on the hill, was blowing hard, heart rate 190.
I didn't even know your heart rate got to 190. This is exactly the thing that... that's not sustainable.
Look,
that's Matthew, the problem. That's the problem. And
no, the problem, also with cycling is, for the most part, that ride was really easy. I was below 150 beat. I was around 130 something, but then it was just that sort of 5 minute all out effort that I did to try and win the race. And that takes a lot. I'm not trained in cycling. I haven't trained on my bike for such a long time. If I ride, I live in Rotorua, I go mountain biking and I cruise, just bomb the trails. And so that's definitely not helping towards my running. It's, but then the other thing, Matt, that's kind of, the addicting nature of the gamification of it is now I'm like, oh, I should do, the weather's looking good this week. My next ride, which I just use which we can talk about, Matt, zone 1, active recovery, bit of zone 2. I want to get out on the trails. I want to experience nature, enjoy doing some jumps, doing some trails. And now I'm like, oh yeah, but if I'm going to ride, I could contribute those Ks to my next level up. So I can unlock some new wheels.
Oh no. Oh no.
See, you don't get any points for riding outside, Matt.
This is, as you know, I have a highly addictive personality. And when I get into something, I'm everywhere and I'm doing it. So my history with video games, I would worry for myself, my future self. So my current self is like, future self, maybe just hold back a little bit and stick to the trails. Safer.
Yeah, and I mean, you're only really just introducing yourself to the Strava world. And I mean, that's an external pressure enough for a newbie like yourself.
Yeah.
And then to take that to the next level with Zwift, Matt, you could, we may not get any podcasts and you'd be riding.
Because yesterday I was actually thinking about this and I did like a 60K ride and it's one of my standard ones. And I was like, well, I'm just going to make sure, I always ride easy, right? And I just wanted to average 30Ks. Yeah. And then I was like, I don't have to like average 30Ks for any reason other than like, I just want to. And endurance is low zone. It's zone 1 to zone 2. It doesn't have to be at the upper end of zone 2. And, so I'll try and limit those things that force
your psychology. Because no one's forcing Strava's not forcing you to do
this. Is all me. This is all me. I need to keep these things away from myself, for sure. But I'm jealous. I want to try it, and that I know that I probably shouldn't.
Yeah, that's definitely what got me into it. So that's something that I've improved a lot. Like since I first got into it, was like they really hook you in these levels and unlocking and all of that. And the other huge positive, which is external to Zwift, is that the humming of my smart trainer, just James, my son, who's now 19 weeks, loves it, puts him to sleep. He's like super chill. He'll just stare at it for like hours. And
is that because the kicker has that little swirly thing, so it kind of looks...
Yeah. That would be it. Like he woke up, it must have been like 3:30 a.m. And then, what are you going to do? I'm not going to do anything at that time. And I need, if I'm not on the bike, he needs entertaining. And then I'm too tired for that. So I just get on the kicker and just go for a ride. And then that puts him to sleep. And then I've done my training. So it's kind of, two birds, one stone. So just between me and Emma, we just need to keep comboing, just like riding all night, keep him asleep.
Funny actually, because you can Zwift race all the time, but to get better at Zwift racing, training helps, right? So following like set workouts to improve your weaknesses. So don't overlook those. And if you need any of those workouts to upload to your Zwift, I can send them to you because I make them all the time. So, we can target some specific
I'm actually a member of Smart MTB training, so I'll just download some of them from there.
One of the things that you could probably work on is your sprinting. So we could probably
oh my God. Running has annihilated my top end power. Holy, I've got nothing. It's just, just the muscle, the neurological pathway, and also just the fatigue in my legs from running, almost 100 miles a week. It's like, cooked.
Yeah. Well, we can get you on some sprint ones. Let's talk about this offline.
Yeah. So anyway, that's me. I'll be keen to get those sprint workouts. What about you, Matt? Like I hear you've been riding, you've been staying indoors, like two of your favorite things.
Those are like my only things, I guess, especially yeah. So have you seen the teaser post that I've been putting up?
Yeah.
So I've been working with a designer, and I think it looks really, really cool. I'm super excited. And what the Break A software does is it shows you your braking, which has never been done before. It looks really cool with like all kinds of awesome graphs. And then we start to narrow it down and we show you the braking events that you can improve the most. And like, it's done. Like, it actually is there and it works, and we're going to be launching it super soon. And other than that, working with my athletes, and we're getting excited because a lot of my athletes were coming into their best like kind of season. We're like, well, we don't want to waste, hopefully races aren't too far off.
Yeah, athletes are like, we've done the same. I just Matt, get this. All right. So shout out Anna. She's a long time listener. She did a time trial, half marathon, personal best, like the best she had ever gone for a half marathon, solo, in lockdown. Her Garmin failed. Like, it just wouldn't upload. She couldn't find the file. Nothing, like, it didn't happen. It's like, how did that? She took a photo of her watch. It was on her watch. She can't get it off. Yeah, so you just imagine that. It does suck. It sucks. Like, you want to have a record of that.
Similar, a Garmin issue. I was like, look, you need to get used to this and you need to be able to work the problem, because these problems are always going to happen, and they're always going to happen at the worst time. Right? Because there's never a good time for something with your tech that you spent a lot of money on. There's never a good time for that to have a problem. So anytime it happens, it's going to feel like the worst time.
Yeah, well, the opposite kind of happened with my wife, Emma, where her Garmin went flat on the start line of, I think it was her first, like, full-on half marathon race. And she ran a massive personal best, like way faster than she was expecting to, or she would have paced herself to. She just got in a group and was like, she like ran it on average faster than in like her fastest 5K split. It was like nuts. It was outrageous. But then at least there's an actual result for that,
Yeah.
Yeah, like a legitimate one. Whereas, yeah, the personal best. But yeah, Matt, so stoked for your Break A software. Can't wait to put it on the giant trance and rip it. Yeah. If I end up riding outside again. Okay, Matt, let's get into our topic of the week, training zones, because it's murky waters out there. We as sports scientists and coaches, we often just throw training zones there. And if you sign up to any kind of like data collating Strava, Training Peaks, Sports Tracks, Today's Plan, like any of those kind, Garmin, Sunto, they all have them. They just give you zones, right, based off of power, speed, heart rate, pace, but are they correct? What do they mean? What do you mean? What do I mean? So we want to break it down and kind of introduce training zones.
I've been thinking we actually think about them a little bit differently. I know you use, I think, fewer zones. We'll get into that. So what we do is we end up going out and let me pull it up, because I don't know them by heart. I just know, what the zones are. And this is how we'll get into what we think's important. But, it gives the impression that if you are 1%, that obviously leads you to believe that 56% of your threshold power is not active recovery. And the way energy systems work, it's just not that black and white, because energy systems are kind of on a continuum where we're using most of them at any given time, but we'll be relying on one more than the other.
First off, we'll introduce training zones, and really, I think that the fundamental basics of the zones are a 5-zone system, right? And you have one. I'm not going to count to 5.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, yeah. Those are the zones. At the base level, yeah. 1 being active recovery, 2 being aerobic, maximal aerobic function, and then zone 3, grey zone, that's very murky waters, tempo, yeah.
Well, this is one of the issues where they have different names, right? So
but I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Otherwise, you'll sidetrack me. Zone 4, threshold, another very ambiguous term, and zone 5, VO2 max.
Yeah, but then there's also, I know some coaches will use zone 5A, zone 5B, zone 6. It's like
7.
7?
Neuromuscular.
Oh my
Neuromuscular.
goodness. Oh
Yeah.
boy. Yeah. I just don't think it's important to get that specific. And we'll talk about why.
So let's go. Zone 1. Okay, Matt. So we're going to the start. We've got our zones. For this, we're doing 1 till 5. What do you have to add before we break it all down?
Well, I think it's really important to firstly talk about how we get these zones, because this is one of the first things that we do when we start working with an athlete. So way, way, way back in the day when heart rate monitors were invented and they needed to be really easy to use, someone said, well, take 220 minus your age, find your max heart rate, and then put it into this calculator and you'll find your zones. So as we started to learn more about heart rate and things like the lactate threshold and power meters and things like that, what we started to do is we started to integrate models that based zones off of the lactate threshold, and there are different ways to test that.
Yeah, so you kind of have that 1 hour limit. You're like, okay, if I'm training above this limit, this line, then I can't go for longer than an hour. Like in the real basic terms, but through testing blood lactate, scientists figured that out. And they're like, okay, let's work back from here. How long could you do 90% of that output? How long could you do 50%? And then you go, okay, cool. And then they started to generate the zones, right? Critical power is what they've called it for running. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So actually we use critical power in cycling as well. So I think actually the way it actually is in practice is they all kind of represent this same kind of thing. So in cycling, what we do is we go out and first off, no one, even though the lactate threshold is representative of what we can do maximally for 1 hour, we're not going to go out and do a 1 hour time trial very often. Because that takes, that they suck, right?
I've only done one once. Not in a race, I guess, like a 40k time trial is approximately an hour. But that was a big, like a mountain climb, right? Like it was like a 1 hour hill climb. Otherwise, and then a half marathon takes me just a bit over an hour, but I'm not out there doing that by myself, not in a race. I just did a 10k time trial in the weekend, and that was excruciating enough for 30 minutes. That was the limit of my intrinsic motivation to push myself maximally.
Yeah. So what we do is we do a test that takes about 20 minutes. So 8 to 20 minutes. And even that, you still going maximally for a pretty long time. There's still a lot to ask from an athlete if you're doing it regularly. But what we can do is if we do something like 20 minutes, we can multiply our power output or our heart rate times a factor that makes it representative of what we probably would have done for an hour. So usually what we do is if we go for 20 minutes and we get, say, a power of 350, we would multiply it by 0.95, get 95% of that, and that is what we probably could have done for an hour, and that probably represents our lactate threshold, and that is probably a good thing to use to base these very, very discrete limits on for our training zones.
Any statistician or mathematician's like, whoa, what is the error? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really easy to see that. It gets murky really, really quickly. So zones are a really good way to prescribe exercise because you know what to do. And over time, you learn how it feels. And it's super simple for an athlete and a coach to communicate and to analyze information when we know these discrete zones. But I don't think we need to think about them so specifically and put so much importance on these super, super specific numbers. Because they are a zone. And this is, as we talk about it, this is how energy systems work. They're on kind of this continuum, and they don't start and stop at 56% your lactate threshold. So this is for any sport.
So that's how they come about. You determine sort of a physiological maximum over different durations, and you work backwards from there. Like, okay, if you can, run a marathon, or you can hold 300 watts for an hour, run a marathon in 4 hours, then you can most probably, scientifically, mathematically tested, within a margin of error, run slightly slower than that for 6 hours. And same with the bike. So then they get broken down pretty much into 5 zones. And as we'll talk about, there are some above 5, but the real meat and potatoes of a training plan are going to be zones 1 through 4, in my opinion, for the endurance athletes that we are in our audience and we work with. But we'll get to I was going to say the most misused, but I think a lot of them really misused. Zone 1, Matt. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, zone 1, I think zone 1's great, because so at the lower level, that's 0. You're not doing anything. But the upper level of zone 1, you're moving. Like, typically what we would prescribe zone 1 training for is for active recovery, because you're not doing any damage to the muscles. And actually, if you're running or you're pedaling, it almost feels like no effort. It should feel like you're not doing anything, almost like you're wasting time. So obviously, for a lot of athletes, they think they're wasting their time, right? Because it feels like you're wasting your time. But I think it's pretty useful, because you don't need to be going hard all the time. And what we can say with a lot of certainty is, when we're exercising in zone 1, we're relying on oxidative metabolism. We're burning fat as fuel, because we're not going hard, and we're not recruiting those type 2 muscle fibers like we do when we're in something like zone 5, where it's predominantly zone type 2 muscle fibers that are burning glucose as fuel and creating a lot of lactate. So those are the opposite ends of the continuum.
Yeah, and it's definitely burning fat, because it's so easy. It feels too easy. Like, that's how you can kind of identify zone 1. And where zone 1 gets misused is, like, people think it's training, like trying to induce a training stimulus. But in my mind, or my explanation of it, is it's a recovery based zone. So a zone in which you are using an activity or exercise, muscular contractions, to stimulate the activity of that muscle to help it recover and adapt to the stress you put on it within your training plan. So for runners, I recommend going out for a bike ride, and for pure runners, they grasp the concept super easy, because they don't ride bikes. They generally got a pretty crappy bike, so they will just go for a ride and spin it out, and they find that activity of non-weight bearing activity really nice, and it helps them still feel like they're training as well when in a down week, and we can increase the duration of it a bit. But yeah, it's like, the easier you can take those, the more benefit you're going to get in your overall plan, because it's not the individual zone 1 recovery session that's trying to make you, the better athlete on that day. It's trying to make you the better athlete within the plan.
Yeah. I gotta say, I don't really prescribe zone 1 rides super often. Obviously, like, we do a lot of recovery and appropriate recovery, but not a ton of just zone 1 rides, maybe 1 a week. Sometimes none in a week, sometimes a couple, but they don't, like, trying to limit someone within zone 1. Sometimes, maybe we do just have a day off or take a walk. But it'll largely depend.
Yeah, I'm thinking like elites here, pretty much. I think zone 1's a waste of time for the majority of your weekend warriors. Like, there's just not enough time. You might as well, you're not training enough to be able to include zone 1 as additional training. You might as well do nothing and really focus on the sessions you do have time and energy for.
Yeah, especially if you have time, like if you do have limited time to be training or out there or exercising, you want to be having fun. And zone 1, like, maybe isn't super fun, but I think that transitions nicely to zone 2, because oftentimes when I'm prescribing exercise, I'll combine zone 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's super useful because, so zone 2 is our endurance training zone. And we do that a lot. Even for our enduro athletes and our downhillers, we're spending a lot of time in zone 2 because as athletes, we need to be really, really good at using fat as fuel and transporting oxygen to our muscles. And zone 2, it really represents the highest rate of work where we're relying predominantly on oxidative metabolism. So we're still using predominantly fat as fuel, and that's one of the things that we want to get really good at using.
Yeah, oxygen and fat. Like, they're just so available and on our body and in the atmosphere. Oxygen and fat, like, it's limitless. And so the more efficient we can utilize those two fuel sources, the better our outputs. Like, we can go faster, we can go further, we can generate more power at a sustainable rate. And so I guess, like, when you talk about zone 2, you have to talk about zone 3, because you think, well, why don't I just go a little bit harder, Matt? You know, like, Matt wants me to be in zone 2, all right? And he says that this is going to allow me to generate higher outputs, be faster, go for longer. Well, I might as well just try a little bit harder.
This is the trap. Like, this is the biggest trap.
But this is also this is where zones become super valuable in my mind.
Yeah.
Right? So we have zone 2, and zone 2, we've talked about it more so, like, in depthly in the Training with Heart Rate podcast, which is all really centered around where heart rate has its most effective application. That's for zone 2. So that's the aerobic capacity, and in some of Matt's stuff we've talked about training for mountain biking. The more oxygen you can use and the faster you can utilize it, the faster you can recover from really hard bouts of exercise, or, you know, attacks or uphills or whatever it is where you really have to go quite hard. You can recover quicker because you can start to regenerate the energy that you lost, I guess, for lack of a better term, with oxygen and fat, like renewable resources. So that's zone 2, and that is the meat and potatoes of any endurance plan, right? But then we have,
well, this is why 3. I think we need to talk about these zone 1, zone 2 a little bit more, and kind of the trap of exercising at the limits of our zone. Because what I usually do is I combine zone 1 and 2 as the prescription for an endurance ride. And the reason I do this is because if you just prescribe one zone, if you have a highly motivated athlete, they're going to be at the upper limit of that zone.
Matt, if you prescribe me zone 1 and 2, I'm not even looking at zone 1.
I know that happens. That is pretty much what everyone does. They will turn I can see it on their Zwift rides, I can see it on their outside rides. They're turning the dial up to the highest limit of zone 2, and they're kind of sitting there for the entire ride. And I don't think that's necessary. It's not necessary.
I know it's not. Like, sometimes you're just you'll just find yourself near the upper end. And then other times you think, I'm tired. I'm motivated. I know I need to get out there. I had a big weekend of training. I'm just going to tick it along. and you go shook straight up to the top. You know,
Yeah.
and that's, if you have a hard interval session the next day and you're pushing yourself into more fatigue, you're not getting the best aerobic stimulus and training adaptation out of that workout. And that's where, like, as coaches, we can only do so much, because maybe you're on a flyer and you feel amazing, super light on the pedals, light on your feet, and you're just cruising. It barely touches the sides. And so we have to set those limits, right? But we're just so eager to improve that we're like, boom, let's hit the top.
Yeah, and that's totally not necessary. Then, so if you're even at the transition of zone 1 to zone 2, you're still getting a training stimulus. And I think one of the issues is that we always think of training stimulus as being a muscular adaptation. And if we can feel the use of our muscles, that we're getting more training stimulus. But actually training, especially when we're talking about training at a sustainable level, it's actually as much about bringing in and using oxygen, because that is actually what we're trying to do. So even in zone 1, we're bringing in and using oxygen. And that's the main limiter of exercise capacity, is bringing in and using oxygen efficiently. So anytime we're out there moving, whether we're at the higher level of zone 2 or lower-ish level of zone 1, we're still doing the same thing. So it's okay to be like at a lower end or dip down into zone 1 sometimes, even on your long rides. Like, it's totally okay. And we can see this even in people who go out and do hiking. They can still develop, just walking. Like, walking's really low impact, usually pretty easy, but you get tired if you do it for about 8 or 10 hours. And you can still develop a high aerobic capacity just by walking. And, that's probably zone 1.
Yeah. Yeah. But then also zone 1, I have to rename it, in Training Peaks, because, one of my athletes who was doing the 100-mile race, right? 100-mile run. Obviously we got to do some pretty big sessions. And then she flicked me a screenshot. She's like, "What's this?" And because, it said, like 4 hours in active recovery. But that was a running power output based zone. And because you're walking up a hill and it's hard, you have, you got your hydration and your compulsory gear on your back and stuff. And active recovery is not the right term for for 4 hours within a 6-hour run. Just because you're walking up a hill. So yeah, maybe active recovery. I think easy or super easy should be a better term for zone 1.
Yeah, and super easy is like still training, isn't it?
It is. It totally is. So those are zone 1 and 2.
So what we're talking about up to this point is zone 1 to 2 is anything below 75% of your threshold power and 69 to 83% of your threshold heart rate. So I feel bad for the poor postdoc that was out there looking at all this data and analyzing all these exercise tests, trying to understand what energy system was being utilized where, and had to come up with these really discrete limits that we still use today. But they're there.
Yeah, that would have been a tedious test, I can tell you.
I wonder if we should go back and use, I'm not sure if machine learning existed back when when these zones were invented. So maybe we need to go back and someone needs to do another postdoc kind of redeveloping them.
Yeah, you could probably ask Garmin or Strava. Like, they have all that data and they have the same user name or number, however they identify someone. They have all their capacities. They have all of my data. They know how fast I've done a 10K, half marathon, ultra marathon. They know where my training is. They know all my heart rates. Machine learning.
They do, but they don't know what your effort was there, and they don't know what your oxygen uptake was. So you could, you wouldn't want the machine to think that your
Matt, that
highest
just
ever.
reminds me. I've been looking up the science behind you've got a Garmin, and you know how it says training stress or training impact, and training and you're peaking or you're recovering or VO2 max. Oh my, that it is the worst science principles that First Beat Analytics have used to implement those systems. Just if you have a Garmin and you're looking at the physiological outputs like that they give you, that you had this much anaerobic stimulus within your session and you are currently at this fitness level and your VO2 max equals this. It is kind of just on a very broad use of estimating.
Yeah, well, you got to start somewhere. I don't think they're there yet, but we can't rely on those, because sometimes you'll turn your Garmin off or you'll finish a ride and it'll say you need 3 days recovery. So what are you going to do? Throw your training plan out the window? It doesn't know what your actual goals are or what you're training for or what your limiters are. They're not quite there yet. It's a good start, and I can see the value in those in the future, but yeah, we'll see where they go.
They'll get there. All right, we should get into zone 3 now, because we keep talking around it. So often, yes, referred to as the gray zone, and it's called the gray zone because it's not zone 2. It is slightly above your aerobic capacity, so the rate at which you can utilize carbohydrate, fat, and oxygen to oxidatively produce energy or muscular contractions. And then, so when we start to go beyond that, we start to generate lactate and blood lactate. And the association with lactate is acidity. So this then induces like an extra stress on the muscle cells. And often when we do this without a specific goal, or we've just entered into zone 3 outside of zone 2 because we feel like we need to be going harder or having a 30k an hour average like Matt's Strava upload, we now are just inducing like this non-specific, relatively toxic, like it is acidic stress to our system. And if we do that day after day, we're now beginning to damage our aerobic capacity. And that's why it's called the gray zone. Hey guys, I just want to take a quick pause to tell you about our new 6-part e-learning course that Dr. Matt and I have put together to help you guys better utilize sports science to train more effectively. You can check it out at performanceadvantagepodcast.com. The link will be in the show notes. And if you pre-register before the release date of 1st of June 2020, you will get 50% off. That's a saving of $150. And it will only cost you $149 for a 6-part course that has videos, it has audio, it has downloadable resources, and a quiz after each 6-part section. We're going through things like understanding aerobic development, analyzing your training and training peaks, periodization, polarization, everything you need to know to be a more effective athlete. If you're an athlete, if you're a coach, if you're a student, this is a resource you're really going to want to have. Lifetime access, all in, whenever you want, in your own time. Check it out, performanceadvantagepodcast.com. We've got 50% off until June 1st, 2020. All right, back to the show.
I think, you know why I think it's called the gray zone?
Yes.
Because no one knows what the heck's going on. Coaches are like, oh yeah, that zone is like kind of, yeah, what's happening there? Oh, I don't know, well, it's not zone 2 and it's not zone 4, so it's the gray zone. We'll just call it zone 3, tempo. What else? What other names does it have?
I don't know.
Mostly just tempo and zone 3.
Marathon pace?
Well, funny you mention.
Refer to it. Yeah.
Funny you mention that, because this is pretty much any mountain bike like any cross country mountain bike race. Everyone's average power is zone 3.
Yeah.
And this is how I kind of explain why it's pretty important to do exercises in zone 3. It's like, well, look at your race. You were going all out, but most of the time you were actually in zone 3. And on average, it was zone 3. There were lots of times above zone 3, zone 4, everything like that. But we do spend actually a lot of time in zone 3. And where it really, really gets gray is that your kind of average rider, average weekend warrior will go out, and this is what they're spending most of their time exercising in, is zone 3. It doesn't hurt too bad, and it's not super easy. But if they maintain it for a long time, it feels pretty hard and like they got a really good workout in. And this is what we see most of the time, is that people spending all their time training in zone 3.
Yeah. Yeah, and for runners, it's quite easy to end up in zone 3 because of the weight-bearing, load-bearing nature of running, just to get moving at what would I say, Matt? A pace that looks good, like a pace where you feel like you're actually running and you're moving well, especially if you're entering into running out, having not competed or trained before. Like, your capacity to exercise to run for a very long time is minimal. So what happens is you go, all right, I want to run a marathon. I want to run a marathon in 4 hours, which is I think it's 5 minute 40 per K. And you go and do it. And you're like, well, this is what I need to do. So I just need to get better at doing this. Feels hard, but not too hard. And boom, I'm getting a good workout in.
And you are, right? For the record, that's a pretty good workout.
It is. Yeah, it is.
It is, but to continuously improve, that's not where we want to be spending all our time.
Yeah, and so where it becomes grey is that you're not training, really specifically either energy system. Not necessarily energy system, because it's your specific adaptation or stimulus. It's not fully aerobic, but then it's not a point at where lactic acid or lactate, is accumulating, right? So you're not improving your lactate threshold significantly. I guess we could probably argue maybe that you are, and then you're not really improving your aerobic capacity either.
Yeah, but in a way,
but then
you're doing both.
You are. Yeah. I know. But you are if your training around zone 3 is formulated so that it slots in very nicely with a specific goal. Yeah. Like it would for a marathon paced effort or a half Ironman power output based bike ride, but not every day.
Because what's happening is there's actually still damage going on, and there still is an acidic environment in a way when we're exercising in zone 3. So lactate's not accumulating. And I think we need to do a whole podcast on just lactate, because there's this idea that lactate itself is the burning. I know a lot of coaches get annoyed because when they hear people say, I got lactic and I felt that lactic acid.
Get annoyed.
No, I don't. I think
you were growling me before just because I used the term.
Well, we were debating, actually. We were debating the difference between lactic acid and lactate, and we kind of had to remind ourselves what it was. But
we spent about an hour before the podcast researching it, and also the bicarbonate pool, and we went we ended up going way too deep.
Yeah, it was a bit of a rabbit hole. It's actually nice to remind ourselves of the really, really specifics that no one really needs to know. But I forget where I was going with that. But
lactic acid. So
yeah, it's still.
It's not. Yeah, it's I've seen it referred to as blaming TVs when you get robbed. So if someone steals a TV from your house, you're like, bloody TV. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have got robbed. Right? That's lactic acid or lactate. Is that you go, lactate is there in the blood. So associated with this decline in performance or fatigue above a certain level. And so you go, well, it must be lactate's fault. But there's actually a burglar who came in and stole your TV, and that is hydrogen ions or acidity. So it's actually the associated hydrogen ion or acidity that goes alongside the lactate, and so lactate and lactic acid, they're the same molecule. It's just in the physiological pH that we exist. So the level of acidity that's within our body, it goes to the basic form, which is, I'm getting too sciencey, but it forms lactate and a hydrogen ion, which disassociates from the lactic acid molecule.
And that's when we get a buildup of that and we're not able to clear the hydrogen ions, we have an acidic environment. And that's where it's really dangerous for the muscles and the cells, because they can't exist in that acidic environment. But actually the lactate itself can be converted into fuel, and athletes who develop a really good ability to generate and utilize lactate, they can actually do quite well for themselves, because that lactate can then be converted into pyruvate, and that goes into the Krebs cycle, and we can use it for muscular contraction. So it can actually be really handy. And that's one of the things that we're doing when we're exercising in maybe zone 3, probably zone 4, is we're upregulating those enzymes that can utilize lactate amongst other things. So
yeah, but then again, like, you can't get an adaptation or the generation of new enzymes, which are proteins in an acidic environment. So if you are training a lot and you train in zone 3, you have a chronic exercise-based acidic environment, which never really allows for a lot of adaptation. And then you couple that with like maybe a poor diet and people's very busy lifestyles, there's no room for recovery, which is adaptation and the building of fitness. And that's where zone 3 is really like the gray zone.
Yeah, because you're not going hard enough where you feel super duper tired at the end of it, and you could probably do it many, many days in a row, which, you're overlooking some of the really important adaptations that you're getting in zone 2, because when you start to build up an acidic environment, you're not developing mitochondria really efficiently. And mitochondria are our greatest friend when it comes to exercising.
Yeah, that's the powerhouse. That's what uses the oxygen and the fat to generate the energy we need for the muscular contractions. So we've got zone 3. So zone 3, now that's like we've gone over quite a bit of how it's bad, but then also it works. Like, there's in a lot of endurance sports, marathon definitely specifically, a half Ironman, triathlon, and an Olympic distance triathlon. When we're looking around that 2 to 4 hours, Matt, I would say you need to train the outputs, like whatever power output you're going to run at. If you're doing an Ironman, you've got to swim at that intensity for around an hour. So now we need to put it in the training plan, right?
Yeah, I have no problem prescribing zone 3, but it's not very often. I think it's a great thing to do because you can do it and you don't feel too bad afterwards, and there are a lot of benefits for it. But so the only real risk with zone 3 is doing way too much of it, because then we're not spending any time in our other zones, and those other zones are very important too.
Yeah, so I guess I see it as not really so much as a physiological biochemical adaptation, as much as an overall feeling and race-based specificity session, right? So there's a certain level of feeling that goes with zone 3.
Yeah.
Which is that hard but not hard. It's still steady state, but it's a uncomfortable one.
Yeah, I think a lot of times a lot of coaches, to put this really into perspective, will talk about conversation, like how, if you were maintaining your effort level in this zone, what would your conversation be like? And in zone 3, you can still hold a conversation, but you have to, take big breaths in between, right? And we've all been on those group rides or those group runs where it eventually starts to become a race. So we start and it might be easy to start, and then eventually we're in zone 3, and you can hear how people's voices are changing, right? The conversation gets pretty bad quality because it's harder to think. And eventually we find ourselves in zone 4, and then we're on a full-on race, and then we're totally dead by the end. This is exactly what happens no matter what group I've been with. Right? Am I right? Can you?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
100%.
And
yeah.
And that feeling, like, we don't often get that feeling in our training. And so by prescribing this zone 3, we're really getting prepared for that feeling, and where it's like a kind of hard climb or pace, and we're ready for it. But it's not too hard, and we can do it over and over.
Yeah. Also, what I like to look at, like post training, is the sustainability of it as well. You go, okay, you want to run, so Matt's often going to refer to power outputs, and I'm often going to refer to running paces, just for the predominant athletes that we work with. So you want to run a marathon, you want to do 4 hours, you want to run at 5:40, go out and do it. Is it sustainable? Can you see a rapid, or I guess uncontrolled, non-linear increase in heart rate? Then we have an issue where that's not sustainable, and maybe I need to, as a coach, revise your zones. And so that's where, like, for the Ironman, half Ironman athletes that I work with, is the same kind of thing. You go, look, it's clear that you were trying a lot harder than you've let on, because athletes do that. And I can see that this is not a sustainable intensity. So we need to either, for whatever reason, go lower zone 3, because they were probably exercising at the very upper limit, or revise the zones or go into zone 2.
Yeah, it doesn't feel the same. Like, not every athlete can sustain zone 3 the same. And this is, like, you actually see differences in every zone across athletes, because you can see if they're at a steady state, how their heart rate changes. If it's really sustainable, there's not going to be a lot of change in your heart rate as you get towards the later stages of that effort. And it's not equal for everyone. And this is where we really get into trouble using these super, super discrete zone levels for everyone and being at the upper limits of them. Right? So you can see how maybe for some people, and depending on how the zone was set, how the level was determined, they could pretty much be in zone 4 during this zone 3 effort by being at the upper limit of it. Right? So these discrete zones, they start to really become an issue as we get to a higher level, as we start to exercise more intensely.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't even touched on yet is, how are you measuring your zone? Are you measuring with power, pace, or heart rate?
Yep. Maybe a combination?
Exactly. So 4. We're out of 3, we're in 4.
Yeah.
Threshold. Oh, that's ambiguous. What is threshold, Matt? What is zone 4?
Well, threshold is what we are actually, this is how we determine our zones. So we should really know what threshold feels like. And so even though we determine threshold using an all-out time trial, if we exercise slightly below that level, we can actually maintain the effort for a really long time. And this is our lactate threshold, where we are starting to really accumulate lactate. There's an accumulate of hydrogen ions and acidity in the muscle, and it's not really sustainable for a really long time. So that doesn't mean you're going out and doing multiple time trials, which is exactly how I used to do zone 4 efforts. It was multiple time trials back to back, and then I'd ride home. And I thought, yeah, that was a dialed zone 4 threshold repeat ride. And it wasn't, because I was going way too hard. Zone 4, you should actually be able to sustain it. And this one's good because when you go out and maybe this is super common, you'll do like a 2x20 on the bike. Do you guys do that in running, like a 2x20 threshold?
Yeah, pretty much like 5K.
Okay.
So we'll do any 3 to 5K. So depending on the fitness level of the athlete, they'll do 2, 3 of those.
Okay. Yeah, and like you finish a workout like that and you feel like you did something. You're not totally
man,
spent.
by the end of it, like you're pretty done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, that's exactly how zone 4 should feel. Like the first effort should feel, and especially at the start of it, it doesn't feel like much. But then what happens is you start to accumulate blood lactate and you start to get acidic environment and you start breathing heavier. You start having to buffer the acidosis, start to have an increased CO2, and you're breathing out water during the buffering process. And so by the end, you're really feeling it because of the accumulation over time.
What Zone 4's trying to do is like, I guess, find that sweet spot, perfect point at which the accumulation of lactate and fatigue is not so great that after 2 minutes you're done. That it's like a real feeling, like a definitely sort of psychological feeling of like this. I'd prefer to stop. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like I'd prefer to go a bit easier. And again, that is a trap for Zone 3 as well. And that people don't want to do 2x20. They'd rather do 40 at something that feels kind of hard. Because this is super uncomfortable, and this is where the real adaptation happens with the rest and repeat and reapplication of the stimulus.
And this is where I think pacing becomes incredibly important in this zone, because if you're not pacing properly, what you're doing is you're starting out in zone 5, and by the end of it, you're exercising in zone 3, and you spent most of the time suffering, but only exercising at a zone 3 level.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly like what happens in a group ride. And this is, so having something, especially power output. So heart rate is pretty useless, especially in this zone, because, what most people try and do is get their heart rate up really, really up to the exercising level right away. And it's just not possible because, it should actually feel kind of easy when you start it, but by the end it's really hard, and then you recover and do it again, and that's the beauty of them. You can do lots of them, and I gotta say, I know I've been saying I just ride easy, but I did some zone 4 efforts the other day. Yep, and they hurt.
Wow.
They hurt.
I just filmed a video for running with power, and I was doing hill repeats. Zone 4. Because they were 20 minutes. And anyway, depending on when you're listening to this, check it out on my YouTube channel. And I had my data up and I showed how long it took for my heart rate. It took 5 minutes to get into zone 4. 5 minutes of the interval before, like, it was in zone 2 and then 3 for quite a while. But my power output, running power, was, right there, right from the start, showed my direct output. And so that, when we're trying to rely on heart rate in these higher zones, especially if you're coming off like full recovery, a 2x20, you're not going to get into it with 1 minute rest. You're going to have 5, 10, 15 minutes between. And so your heart rate's going to be all the way down, and then you're going to get into it, and there's going to be quite a long lag time between what's happening at the muscle cell and what's your heart? That's my cat.
There's going to be no way to edit that one out.
And so
I love zone 4. I love prescribing these because, this is the highest rate of aerobic metabolism. So there's a mixture of anaerobic metabolism in there as well, because, all these energy systems are operating at the same time. at any given time. But when we're exercising in zone 4, this is the highest level we're going to be using aerobic metabolism. After that, if we go harder, we're going to be relying more on anaerobic metabolism, which obviously we don't want to do all the time because that is really damaging.
These sessions, I think the zone 4 for endurance athletes who are training 4 and then 2 or 1 are going to provide the best bang for buck in terms of your adaptation. They're super taxing because you can do them for so long, but then they provide such a good stimulus because you are able to do them for so long. It's not these kind of, shorter, which we'll get into zone 5 VO2 max workouts where it's, it's 3 minutes, it's 5 minutes. It depends. Are you really tired? Well, then you can't do the outputs most probably at the level that is required to get the best stimulus because most of it's muscular based, contractually based. Whereas zone 4, it's more about the physiology and biochemistry, which you can do even if you're a bit tired, and you can do it for quite a long time. And then the recovery, again, the demands on the actual muscle is not as bad.
Yeah, this doesn't mean we don't do them every day, right? We still use them relatively sparingly, maybe 2 times a week if we're not doing much other hard stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's where sweet spot, best bang for buck training, within a plan. And that's where you can, otherwise you're just going to get on your bike, especially, and thrash yourself day after day. And it'll work for like a lot of these studies you read, hit high intensity training, do it for 2 weeks and get these huge benefits in power output and running speed and VO2 max and economy. And then do it for another month and you're completely injured, burnt out, and unable to train. It needs to be set within that overall plan.
Yeah. And this it's funny, actually, you mentioned that because I've been thinking about this a lot, and we're on some of the coaching forums, and I've been kind of seeing how coaches are really worried about their IP being stolen, which is their workouts. And really, I don't think workouts are intellectual property, really, because what we do as coaches is we prescribe workouts within the context of what a person needs across a given time. And that is where the real art, I would say, of coaching comes in, and that's the real IP of what we do. And I see a lot of coaches really worried now that people are fully locked down and having to exercise, and there's all these free workouts floating around everywhere, that they're worried about what they offer. And don't forget, what you offer is the ability to put these workouts where they need to be. And that's the real beauty of it over time. So you're not just thrashing someone day after day after day.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And you'd said to me the other day how none of this stuff's new. Sure, my workout might look different to yours, and I may be structuring it so that it really targets a 5-kilometer run and a race for someone who is coming from a high mileage background, right? So, and that's the Will O'Connor specialty one, but it has all the same principles of any other workout that is trying to target a 5K running race. It's just I've put my little pinaz onto it, my thought process. But really, if you're doing 5 by 1 minute and I write 6 by 1 minute because I read the same physiological textbook as you, or training for 5K, it doesn't really make it my IP. It's just I then apply it within the overall scope of my training system.
Yeah.
Which is completely different to a lot of other people's.
Yeah, and then every athlete's different too.
Oh yeah, especially when you're working one-on-one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so zone 4. That's where zone 4 sits within the zone system. And now we're in
zones,
5.
Our zones, we talked about some really complex things in our notes here, but I don't think we need to get into lactate dehydrogenase and acetyl-CoA. We'll save that for another podcast. I'd really like to do one just on like lactate threshold.
All right, we can do that.
Yeah, maybe
No,
we'll
I
do
think
that
back
on our
to-
own time,
just
just for fun.
yeah, just a reference. Zone 5, Matt, VO2 max. This would generally be what it's referred to as.
Yeah, we do plenty of this.
This would be what most people would think about as interval training, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's like pretty much anything above lactate threshold. So I think the general prescription, if you're looking at strict power zones, I think it's 106% of lactate threshold. So you can imagine if you're at 107%, you might be able to maintain it for a pretty long time. And this zone, for me, what I do in Training Peaks, I pretty much just delete any zone after zone 5 and I make them all zone 5. Because if I'm prescribing something at a maximal level, which is the only other zone that I'm going to prescribe above zone 5, I'm just writing maximal. And those are so short, it doesn't hardly factor in to a zone. And you're just going all out. And we do them pretty infrequently.
Yeah, the only reason I keep in zone, it depends what system. Generally, they'll have about 7. And so you go VO2 max, and then you go out, if you say 6 is slightly faster than that, or slightly bigger power output, and then 7's like sprinting. The only reason I keep those in there is actually as a reference to see, have we done that? Like, have you reached 150% of your output at all within training? Because otherwise zone 5 can kind of cloud that, because it's to the point where you could probably hold it for, depending on the athlete, somewhere in 5 to 10 minutes, right? And that is nowhere near a power output which you would sprint at.
No, yeah, you're right.
And so, have you been sprinting, or have you been, and across any sport? And so I just like to look back, and because I was really made aware of it with an athlete. I was like, when they didn't perform at a shorter event as well as I'd like, and I was like, wow, all of your hard stuff was actually, it was not fast enough, and there's a lot of underlying fatigue there that we missed. So that's why I'd leave them in.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. I think what with a lot of what we're doing with mountain bikers is, if it's really, really, really hard, it's going to be in the gym. So, and there's no way to measure that, because if you're doing a counter movement jump, you're doing a counter movement jump, and that is high power, because otherwise you're not leaving the ground. So heart rate doesn't factor in, power meter doesn't factor in, and we're just probably not doing a whole lot of that on the bike. But we can see it happening in races for sure.
Yeah. So zone 5, what are we trying to achieve within zone 5? Like your VO2 max, your high output stuff, Matt.
Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is, because we have such a high level of recruitment of type 2 muscle fibers, and we're using predominantly glucose as energy, is we're getting a lot of lactate accumulation. And you can feel the acidity as soon as you stop these. There's super high level of your blood flow, and because you're trying to meet this demand with oxygenated blood, you're trying to deliver fuel, and there's just so many things happening at once at the highest level. And yeah, I guess we're trying to achieve a lot of things, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we're trying, like, we also have the capacity to exercise at an output beyond what we're going to race at. Okay, so it's like a overreaching. You want to, for most of us, at least an hour minimum. It's what we're going to be doing as endurance athletes. But in order to get a stimulus that's going to increase, the amount of muscle we can use for an hour plus, We need to actually recruit that muscle. And one way we could do it is to train for, or exercise for hours and hours on end until all of the muscle fibers surrounding that one fatigue, and then we have to rely on the very deep, large, inefficient muscles, and then we train them and convert them. We don't have the capacity to train for hours and hours every day. So what we can do is train at really high outputs for really short periods of time so that we can recruit those muscles that otherwise within an endurance training plan don't get a lot of stimulus. And then that allows us to work that high output sustainable speed, or I guess, so I'm thinking speed and running, but in mountain biking and cycling, like there's so much up and down in intensities. Like in running, there's really just one. It's just time trialing.
Yeah, kind of. And, I guess a mountain, like especially a cross-country race, is in a way a time trial, but you end up going really hard on the uphills and not doing anything on the downhills as far as power output is concerned. So these are, when we think about what we're doing in mountain biking, it's really easy to think of, well, if I need to get better at mountain biking, I'm going to go do zone 5 on and then off, on and then off, because that's what we do when we're racing. But actually, we don't spend a whole lot of time in zone 5 anyway. There's really a lot of time in zone 4. Even when we're climbing, it just feels like zone 5 because we're going so hard. And we're just paying that debt.
Yeah, with running, it's a lot of it is around the efficiency of movement, and trying to run or output at a certain rate so that muscular coordination then can be more efficient as you move down the speeds. Because otherwise, like, you can't really just do something really, really slow and then expect to do it a lot faster, just by sheer hope and, I guess, application of the same movement, but at a faster rate. The rate of force production needs to be trained, and we can do that through zone 5. So yeah, like there is so much going on because you still have to deliver oxygen and remove CO2 and water from, your system, of the cardiovascular system. So there's the breathing and the oxygen transport and the blood flow and heart pumping, so the heart rate, and then there's the biochemistry of it, and then there's the muscular neurological recruitment. So that's where, one, it's like super demanding, requires a lot of recovery, and needs to be well rested leading into these sessions so you can do them at your maximal outputs that are required, and then also can be really helpful within a training plan.
For sure. We would do them regularly, but just not frequently. And this is where you can get into a lot of trouble because they are so damaging. But yeah, definitely important to do, to spend time in zone 5. But we're talking, the max time we'd spend doing a zone 5 effort is 5 minutes, probably. I've never prescribed anything over 5 minutes in zone 5, and we might do 5 of those for 5 minutes, right? So, and that's going to be at the lower level of zone 5, where we're only slightly above our lactate threshold.
Yeah, well, for me, I don't even reference a zone for this kind of stuff. I find it good retroactively, like to look back on and go, oh, weird, like, how did that sit within certain zones? Like, was it 3K race pace, 1 mile race pace, or was it like 400, 800 meter sprint? So that's where you can look at zone 5, 6, and 7. I don't really care about what they're doing physiologically. I just want to see where did that pace sit? You were going a bit hard looking back on it, but actually what I'm trying to do is mainly just train a pace, an output, to say, like, or even hard. Like, go fast, go hard and fast. Like, it's hurt. It's going to be 8, 9, 10 out of 10 effort. and you've got full recoveries. You should always have full recoveries on them. For the most part, unless you're right at the bottom end, if you're somewhere in that zone 4 or 5, where you're trying to do some sustainable working on lactate threshold, but otherwise it's like, just show me what you got. Show me what you got for 3 minutes for a kilometer for 800 meters. And then we can use some reference times then based off of that, especially if you understand an athlete. You go, oh yeah, hit these outputs. But that's zone 5 for me.
Yeah. It's a dangerous zone, but it's a useful zone. So I think that's the way I approach it in training, for sure.
And I definitely don't prescribe it with the heart rate. It has like zero relevance in zone 5. Like, who knows? Like I said, when I did an effort and it took 5 minutes to catch up, you get through your whole interval before you've even tried to figure out what your heart rate is. And yeah, so is that us, Matt? Is that training zones?
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about zone 5A, zone 5B, zone 6T, I leave it at that, and other things, it's in the gym. So I think that zones, I think it highlights, some of the issues with zones. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time. I think if you're talking about a zone and you're spending all your time at the upper or lower limits, you're getting close to the other zone. So maybe think about exercising more in the middle so that way your coach and yourself can ensure that you're getting the adaptation that we really want to get for that effort. And that would be my main takeaway.
Awesome. Well, everyone, I hope that helps you stay more informed with zones. And until next time, that is Dr. Will O'Connor and Dr. Matt Miller from the Performance Advantage podcast, bringing sports science to the people. Remember, share this with your friends, put it out there, put it on the gram. You can share straight from Spotify to your Instagram story. It's that easy. Hit us up with a tag. We'll share it to like our thousands of followers. Maybe you'll get some likes back. Until next time, everyone, have a good week.